I am here in the Pipeline studio with Rafael. He is an everything man. He has started and sold his own business. He has a degree in genetics, working on mechanical engineering. He's a podcast host. He's worked on the Pipeline YouTube channel, and he does work with Pipeline. So what hasn't this guy done? Raf, it's great to be with you.
It's great. Well, what haven't I done? Design handles for medical devices, like Joseph here.
Well, rest assured, if you did, everything would be well handled. Now, actually, I'm at Pipeline where Raf is, so I'm a little bit confused as to actually who is hosting whom, but I think we'll get through it just fine. So I have to start off. I think there's so many entrepreneurs and hobbyists that are watching. What was it like to start your own business?
Starting your own company, you heard this many times before. It's not as glamorous as you think. It takes a lot of hard work. And at the end of the day, you have to be the one that pushes things forward. And yes, it's just a lot of tough days, but then the triumphs you get to share with your team, and you get out as hard as the work that you put in. So if you work very hard, you'll likely get rewarded. So I found it a very rewarding experience. I did a mobile application that I launched called EventKey, which ultimately I sold to one of our Swedish investors. And that was my entrepreneurship journey, where I learned all about the software world, the screens, the user feedback, read all the books about entrepreneurship, the lean startup. So that really educated me, and it resonates with who I am. I'm an inventor at heart.
Yeah, well, it really inspired me to think that I think you're in your young 20s at the time, and you just came up with a business and sold it. I think the American dream is still alive, and everybody can kind of look to that example. I certainly have, because I've had a few business ideas floating around in my head, but I haven't quite got to them yet.
Yeah, and the thing, just a quick golden nugget for listeners, you don't have to go all in. You can just test out a little bit, see how people respond to it. By all means, you don't have to quit your job. So that's one golden nugget that I would share with the audience.
Yeah, I really like the idea of growing organically, and maybe I'm kind of a risk-averse person, but it seems like a very safe route to go to. Just taper off what you're doing full-time and move into a whole business. That's great. Now, when you started your business, did you ever get into working it absolutely full-time, like a full-time job before you sold it?
Yes, I worked on it full-time, but I also had, for certain periods, for a period of time I was full-time, another period I also had a full-time job, and I did EventKey, my company, on the nights and weekends. So I made it work.
Wow, that's great. That, starting a business, being your own boss, I think it's just the dream for so many people. So when you sold your own business, what were you kind of looking to get into after you sold it?
Well, when I sold my business, I asked myself, what do I want to do with myself for the rest of my life? So I started looking deep within, praying a lot. I'm Catholic, and that's important to me. And I came across, after several Google searches and interviewing people that I thought had the job that I wanted to have, I tried different routes, but I came across mechanical design engineering. I really like the skill set of being able to design tangible products, and that's called mechanical design engineering, as Joseph is an expert at.
Or I'm so taken to be. Yeah, that seems like a great place to springboard into. And when you're working in the app world versus working in the mechanical design engineering world, were there major hurdles in how you had to change the way you were thinking, or did it get challenging in any way?
Challenging, of course. The similarities, I think, would be what I learned in the lean startup methodology, to really interact with the user, understand what the problem is, and not try to think what their problem is, anticipating their needs. So that translated, but the skill set is different in regards to the tools that I used. So I use a lot of SolidWorks nowadays, CAD, to design the tangible products. And back then, we coded, or we used wireframes for the mobile application.
Awesome. And so you're currently working on mechanical engineering, and you're going to get a bachelor's in that, but you have a bachelor's in genetics as well. What got you into the genetics direction, and what inspired you to change and go into mechanical?
So I started at 18 years old. I had to choose what career do I want to have, what major. And my mother said, you have to pick something. You have to get a bachelor's degree. and I've always considered myself an inventor at heart. And I was coming across a lot of articles that were talking about how we can modify genes to maybe cure diseases. And I said, well, what if I can use DNA and change the genome, maybe to do what I just described? And that's what I decided to choose it, to invent. But later on in the career, I found out that that wasn't really the case. It's more like you're conducting studies for other more senior researchers. And at least from my experience, I didn't really get to test the things that I wanted to test. So by the time I graduated and I'd done my 1,000 hours of wet lab research in a laboratory, I decided it's time for me to move on to something different.
What was the most challenging part? Because, I mean, if I remember, you had your degree was from Barrett with honors. And what was the biggest challenge in all of this?
The biggest challenge of a molecular biology degree, I think it requires a lot of memorization, a lot of familiarizing yourself with terminologies. And some exams for genetics were memorizing entire gene sequences. And that was very challenging. So the memorization was the hardest aspect.
Yeah.
It's a little dry sometimes, to be honest. Yeah.
You know, and talking about genetics, I'll say that before we started this, I was mentioning that I was adopted. And so I love cycling. I cycle all the time. No one in my family growing up was big into cycling, but my biological parents both are cyclists. And when you study genetics, do you get any insights into nature and nurture?
So the thing is, we're influenced by not only our genetics, but also our environment, which is called, so everything that surrounds us. And yeah, I just found it really interesting that your biological parents both do cycling and you do cycling, and you didn't, once you reunited with them, you told them about that. So I thought that was pretty cool. I don't have the answer for that.
Yeah.
I'd rather just say I don't have the answer. I like it when people just tell me I don't have the answer and we ended at that. Because when people started think what they think it is, and it just starts getting complicated.
Yeah, life has so many mysteries. It's what makes it great. Well, you're currently working with Pipeline. Tell me what Pipeline does.
Pipeline does medical device test fixtures. So what is a fixture, you may ask? Think about the word fix, right? Constrain, hold in place. We can start from there. So imagine you have a medical device that does some actuation. It could be some clamps, whatever the case may be. In order to launch the medical device into the marketplace, it needs to be some thorough testing needs to be conducted in order for the FDA to approve the medical device. So how do you conduct the testing? That's where the fixtures come in. You may need to constrain the medical device and test for instance, clamp force. And because you want to produce medical devices that are the same every time, there's some consistency in the product that's launched to the marketplace. So medical devices, which is why we specialize here in testing them and the test fixtures that we produce, we can automate them to do maybe some actuation method to test how durable your medical device is, like a cycle tester. That's one of our most popular ones. And that's essentially what we do at Pipeline. And if you want more information, link below.
Absolutely, and I will be putting a link in the description. Aaron heads up Pipeline. I actually haven't met him, but he seems like such an awesome guy. What's he like?
Aaron Munker, the founder of Pipeline, he's a myth. You heard all these great things about him, never met him yet. What's Aaron like? Aaron, I think, has a sixth sense of knowing what other people are thinking. And that plays really well, I think, in owning a business because it requires so much tact, so much soft skills to make people work with each other in massaging situations so everyone can get along. And I think that's one of his superpowers.
Definitely. Well, I think he does a pretty good job at it because this is a pretty cool studio. I got to tour around, and your warehouse and manufacturing areas just look great.
Well, thank you.
So being at Pipeline, what is kind of the direction that Pipeline is looking to go in the future?
So we still do this product design for everyone, but we're really zeroing down on the test fixtures. We want to be the go-to company for test fixtures, and that's our focus right now.
Awesome. That is awesome. Um, if I shift gears a little bit, tell me about the Pipeline podcast, because I normally wouldn't have thought that a fixture company would be interested in podcasting, but I've looked at really amazing guests that you've done on your podcast, and you make a great host, by the way. What?
So do you.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you. What brought you into podcasting?
Podcasting. Well, have you ever had a conversation with someone and they say something that is so honest that it makes people wonder, like, wow, they really just put this out there. So I'm gonna have one of those moments here, maybe, which is really, at the end of the day, the podcast, we would like to derive some sales out of it. We want people to hopefully buy some fixtures, and we thought that the cold calling, although Aaron, who does the sales, and we have other salespeople in the company, are very good at it, we wanted to distinguish ourselves and be something else other than the every 3 months follow up to see if you need some fixtures. So we said, well, let's make it interesting. Let's invite engineers that have something to share, engineers that want to give back to listeners. And when we set up the appointment to have a podcast, we ask them questions. The engineer feels honored, and hopefully we make them feel important, because they are. And we learn, the audience learns, and also the engineer who works at a company may also become aware that we exist. And if they know that we exist, that's a step in the right direction. So if they ever need a fixture, they know who to call us, because hopefully we will have developed some rapport throughout the podcast, and maybe even after the podcast end and before, you get to talk to the person and get to know them a little bit more. So I think that's a good sales effort, and it's very genuine, and everyone wins.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know if I would call what I have on my channel a podcast, but I really like conversations like this, so I'm hopefully going to keep going with the future with it. But what are some of the most interesting hosts you've had on the podcast?
The most interesting see, I don't want to make anyone feel left out now.
They're all interesting, right?
It's like someone asking a basketball player who they think is the best basketball. I'm a huge NBA basketball fan. Who's the best player of all time, Michael Jordan or LeBron James? And nobody wants to answer that question because they don't want to disrespect neither of the players. So
yeah, it's like picking between your kids, right?
So disclaimer, short-term memory. I have to think about some of my most recent guests. And I had an episode lately, last week, and it was with a gentleman. I have to look up the name, but he had perfect Spanish and English, which I thought was remarkable. And he was author of 6 books. Now I'm looking. I don't look my best now because I don't have the name. But we just had a really good conversation even after the podcast ended. And I thought it was remarkable how he was able to launch 6 books, make a company. Okay, here's the golden nugget. A cool thing about launching a book is that it helps the author distill all your knowledge. It requires a lot of thought to distill it into a certain quantity of pages. But then you created so much marketing material that you can use for videos and blogs and postings. So that's something that I learned from interviewing him. Once you launch a book, you really help yourself become hopefully an expert in the field, but it may take several books, several years for that. But at least you have a lot of content that you can now distribute on social media.
That's a really good idea. You know, I just thinking about listening to the Being an Engineer podcast, I tuned in on an episode where there was a helicopter pilot, and he was so honest about his experiences, and when he didn't make the program that he wanted to get.
Johno.
Yeah.
Johno Ellison. Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, he was so interesting to listen to, and I think his honesty about his experience just made it a really rich experience. So I think that's my personal favorite one. But
I really try my best to help the guests feel like there are no bright lights in the room and we're just having a conversation between us, because it's easy to get nervous when you know that there's thousands sometimes of people listening. But yeah, that was a good episode. He felt comfortable enough with our audience to share that. And I think we can sense when people are being honest, and that makes for a good podcast. I personally don't find it as enjoyable when everyone uses so many disclaimers in every statement that they use because they're scared to offend someone. It's like watching a video on YouTube. You have to fast forward the first 2 minutes because they're saying all these disclaimers about, I'm not telling you what to do. We know you're not telling us what to do. Just tell us what's the information.
Absolutely. Well, again, you made a great podcast host, and I think you make a great content creator too. I I haven't been watching too much YouTube lately, but I know at least you were working with the Pipeline YouTube channel. Is that still a thing?
Yeah, we're approaching 2,000 subscribers.
Wow.
That's nothing compared to you. You got 40,000 in this channel.
Yeah.
Joko Engineering. Check it out. Link description below.
Just click the refresh button. Yeah, in my experience, getting those first few thousand is the biggest deal, and then it gets easier from there. And I think you're at the point where you're overcoming the hump if you're getting 2,000. So
Consistency for the algorithm. Keep the algorithm happy.
yeah, if you had to choose between YouTube content creation and podcasting, do you have a preference between the two?
My automatic answer in my head was, why would I have to choose? But if I have to choose, then I like video. But audio is also very convenient when one is commuting.
Yeah.
We don't want to just waste our time. Well, listening to music is good and all, but 2 hours of listening to music every day, if your commute is 2 hours, that's a little excessive. Become better while we're at the wheel or we're driving without being distracted. So podcasting has its place. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, from content creator to content creator, sometimes I often have some dilemmas. Like, I've thought about doing what other content creators do and start a Patreon, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I really want the information to be free. And then I've also kind of thought, well, maybe I can do like an apparel line, but it feels kind of narcissistic to, have my own apparel. I don't know. Has any of that ever been a thing at Pipeline or with your work?
So basically you're asking me how to monetize the content?
Yeah, and do so in a way that feels good.
In a genuine way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one can think about selling the content to maybe, I think you do FreeCAD, is that what it's called?
Yep.
But FreeCAD is, there's no entity that owns it, right?
Yeah.
So no entity could pay you. It's not like the Salt Systems or, I don't know, but merchandise, I would buy a t-shirt. But then you think again, t-shirt, what, $50? And how much do you get? You probably get like $25 or 20 after taxes. I mean, is it worth it? $20? How many can you sell? I mean, yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to monetize. YouTube is a crowded space nowadays.
It is. It really is. So I do have a sample. Just in case it came up. This is my test hat.
Wow, look at that.
This was actually not very expensive to get embroidered, but I'm just playing around with industrial samples, so we'll see if it catches or not.
Right on. You want to show the camera a little bit more again?
Maybe I'll edit in a little picture of it or something. But,
new merch coming soon.
Yeah, but I don't know. From content creator to content creator, it's a big question nowadays.
Let me think about that a little bit more. How to monetize this Joko Engineering YouTube channel. Selling merchandise could be an option. Those links to buy things on Amazon. What are those called?
Oh yeah, like affiliate links.
Affiliate links,
Yeah.
but there's no tangible product to sell. Well, this is how. I just had the idea.
Mm-hmm.
You could sell a course. You could sell knowledge. And Pipeline actually has a class for RCM, Resilient CAD Modeling, that's a whole subject within itself. It's about SolidWorks, a SolidWorks class, but it's like advanced. But you could create a class that you send people to, because there may be a lot of people like myself familiar with other CAD packages, Fusion 360, SolidWorks, etc. And we may be interested about FreeCAD, but we don't know where to start. And the answer is, well, you could learn online for free, right? You could go to YouTube. But the thing about charging for a course, this is a golden nugget that I learned one time, is curating that information in the sequence that one should consume it is worth the price of admission. So if you could create a 20 video course and maybe charge X price that you want, maybe around $10 on Udemy, if you curate the class in the sequence that it's appropriate to learn FreeCAD, it makes it worthwhile for the listener. And for anyone watching this, would this be worthwhile? This is a good test for like the entrepreneurship test. If Joko, I'm making you commit to something you haven't agreed to. But if you were to make a class on FreeCAD, how to get started from scratch and start becoming a proficient modeler, is that something that you'd be willing to pay $15 for on Udemy, for instance? leave a comment below.
Yes, leave a comment below. And also, you mentioned RCM modeling. So go check out his video, link in the description.
The title of this video is going to be link in the description.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great stuff. So amongst all of your life experiences, right? I mean, starting, selling a business, doing podcasts, working with Pipeline, getting all these degrees. I mean, you're cruising. If any of our viewers needed, I don't know, advice on what direction they should go in their life, did you have any insight with all the things that you've been able to do?
I mean, stay true to who you are, and I always try to monetize what I'm good at. So I think, I forgot the name of the book, but it's like developing your strengths, something of that nature. So it's a Catholic book that's combined with the Gallup Strength Finder. Living to Your Strengths, I think it's called. And the whole book talks about how you reach your maximum potential once you maximize your God-given talents. So we all have God-given talents that make us different from everybody else. And I mean, I mentioned God on a podcast, and everybody like shies away from the subject, but I think a lot of people are interested in God. So, and I don't shy away from the subject. So, what are you innately good at that everyone knows around you that you're good at naturally, and then try to see how high you can go in that, instead of trying to be a well-rounded individual, like average at everything. And that's the take-home point from the book, Living to Your Strengths. So that's a bit of advice, a summary of a 200-page book in a paragraph. What's the other question?
Yes. Now I have to remember. It was, do you have any advice for people who may be looking for a certain direction to go or wondering where they should go in their life, and anything that guided you?
So that's one about that book. The other one, which one day when I have a child, this is going to be something that I'm going to pass on to my children. And interestingly, before the podcast started, so Joseph is a father, and that's the greatest blessing. Life is the greatest blessing. It's such a gift. And we were discussing like what to pass on to our children. And I mentioned that sometimes the material things are actually not the most valuable things that we can pass on. It's our values and the way that we think and our habits. Where was I going with this? Let me think. Habits. Okay, this is the tip that I wanted to pass. So before choosing a major, I would actually advise my future child around 16, before he starts or he or she graduates from high school, I would say, why don't you just start interviewing some of the people that have the position that you one day think that you want to have, and see what it's like their day to day. Because we maybe fantasize about what the career or what the position is actually like. And at the end of a 4-year degree, after we put in all that work, we realize it's really not what we thought it was. So that would be a hack.
I like that a lot. It reminds me of Dave Ramsey. I've listened to him on the radio when I've commuted, and someone called in, and she was calling about her husband and said, "Hey, my husband just doesn't have any direction in life, and I don't know what to do about it. And I don't want him to be stuck in this job," and on and on. And it's like, how do you answer that question? Because you can't make a horse drink, right? And he had great advice. He said, choose good friends, because studies show when you have friends that have a higher income bracket, after a certain period of time, the difference in income becomes kind of indistinguishable. And it's nice to know that you're not alone.
Sure thing. Yeah, I wanted to say a joke after that, which was, this is going to become a financial channel now.
Yep.
It's not about CAD anymore. It's about finances.
So let's start talking about bank accounts.
These are the best investments.
Yeah.
We are in Phoenix right now, for those of you watching that didn't know. And right now, the market, no, this is serious. The market for properties has skyrocketed. Everyone's house is like twice the price nowadays, which is good for the homeowner, but bad for the people that are trying to buy, and bad for people renting. So we're going through something right now in the housing market.
Everyone wants to move here because Raph and I are so darn popular.
Everyone does want to move here, though.
Yeah.
Everyone from California came here.
Yeah, we've got something going on that's pretty good.
What is it? What do we have going on that's so good?
I think we've got a good diversity of industry. Uh, Again, I'm going way off on engineering here, but I think it's worth talking about. Arizona's great. So we have aerospace. We actually have a lot of medical here. I mean, I think they've done a good job at getting a lot of different industries here that attract a lot of different people. I think the taxes are pretty low. Property's pretty cheap. It's, you know, we've got saguaro cactuses. They're beautiful. So,
Well, the reason I'm here in Arizona is primarily because of my mother, Rafael Testai, and she's my only family in the United States, and now with my wife. So my mother's here in Arizona, and I want to be here in Arizona as long as my mother's here. So hopefully it's a very long time.
yeah, family's so important.
Mhm.
Um, awesome. Well, I think that's everything that I had to talk through. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our viewership?
Yeah, so uh, I was thinking about whether to have this podcast today or no because I'm going through a rough patch in my mechanical engineering degree. So to make it clear, I already have a genetics molecular biology degree from 7 years ago. I'm 31 years old. So when I graduated, but I went back to school 2 years ago to get my mechanical engineering degree. So when I went back to school, I had taken up to, this is all going to tie in together. I took calculus 1 like 10 years ago in community college. So now when you go back to school 10 years later, you basically forgot most of calculus. My genetics degree only required calculus 1, and I got an A on that. So when I went back to school, this is something that may be inspiring for some of you listening to this, but I'm going to tell you why it's a rough patch at the end. So I went back to school, I enrolled in calculus 2, because I'm like, all right, I'm going to pick up right where I left off from. But I wasn't so naive. Of course, I went to CAD Academy and I studied for like 3 months on my own. So I was like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good about Calculus 2. I go to Calculus 2 class. The first day, I don't understand anything. So I'm like, okay, one more day. Second day, still. All right, let's regress. I go to my academic advisor in the community college. This happened 2 years ago. And I enroll in Calculus 1. Maybe I need a refresher, I said to myself. I enroll in Calculus 1, a subject that I already have an A grade on, but I'm just enrolling to review. Same thing. I'm in class and it's like, wow, deer in the headlights again. This is getting stressful. So I go talk to my counselor and I enroll in pre-calculus. So I'm like 2 steps back now. I'm a little worried now. I go to class and I still don't understand because it's been such a long time. And when you learn by yourself by all means, Khan Academy is wonderful, but nothing beats the rigor of an actual university course taken in person. So I said, okay, what am I going to do? And I came up with this whole strategy, which is to use my Spanish. I'm bilingual. I'm Argentinian, U.S. citizen. One of the proudest days of my life was when I became a U.S. citizen, by the way, a couple of years ago. And given that we're about to start going through COVID, everyone started offering their tutoring services online. So my uncle from Argentina had a brilliant idea, I think, which was to get a tutor from Argentina, an actual mathematician, to help me and be my tutor. So I've been spending like 2 or 3 hours a day for the last 2 years with this mathematician, getting me up to speed. And I passed calculus 2, 3, the 2 physics that require calculus, and I made steady progress. So that's the inspirational side. That's the hack. If you're bilingual, you'll be able to get a tutor for a lot cheaper from another country. So I encourage everyone's child to be bilingual if you can. And the other thing is, right now I'm going through a really rough patch. I'm taking the class differential equations, and I was just telling Joseph before the podcast that this is a rough patch right now. I'm considering like I'm falling behind in a couple of my classes, and I'm considering maybe dropping one class for the first time in my career so I can catch up on differential equations. That class just feels like doing math taxes, which taxes are very boring for me, 3 hours a day, every day. And I'm getting tired of it. So it's like, I just can't wait until that class is over.
I'm doing my taxes right now. I can relate.
Really? Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a big inspiration, I think. I remember I had a similar experience. I started the whole channel, Joko Engineering Help, because I was kind of frustrated that I wasn't learning CAD. And when I talked to academic advising, apparently my major was in a route that CAD wouldn't have added to my major, and I was trying to graduate fast, and I was just frustrated that I couldn't learn it. So I taught myself as much as I could. I think I was able to squeeze one class in, and then it was almost like a channel out of spite. If I can't learn CAD through university, I'm going to teach everybody else. And I remember having a conversation with my dad. We were driving somewhere, and I was just sitting in the car going, "Look, all these other guys are so good at CAD. Like, who's going to hire me if I can, if I'm just self-taught and haven't been able to learn it?" And I was really discouraged, and I really felt like I was not employable. And I started interviewing at a company called Stratco. Right, I was fresh out of school. Thankfully, my internship hired me. And when I was working with Stratco, I had the experience of a lot of people before me had way more qualifications, more industry experience. I was still fresh out of school, green as grass, but they liked my personality so much better that they went with me. And now to this day still feel part of the Stratco family. I'm still in contact with them, and I'm like, it was a real lesson to me that even if you're down on your technical skills, there's a place for you. And I it's hard to put into words, but when you are kind and when you have friendships with people and you can just affect people and change things in ways that you never thought possible, right? There's a place where you're going to fit no matter what. So
That's fantastic advice. I remember you mentioning that when I interviewed Joseph months ago on the podcast, on the Being an Engineer podcast, and that always stuck with me. If you're not if you're gonna pass this differential equations class with a B or a C, at least be a good person. I tell myself, at least be a good hang in the company. But would that still apply if it's the opposite? If someone is very intellectual and capable technically, but they're just difficult to be around?
yes, I've worked for a few.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say tell us about it, but maybe not.
Fortunately, where I'm at now, everybody is awesome. But no, I think I think the brainiacs really do have a lot going for them too. So don't worry if your personality sucks. There's still a place for you.
That's a good bit of advice. Let's see. What else should we discuss that our listeners may be interested in? One day we have to do like a YouTube live so people can ask us, right?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be super cool. Get on it, Aaron. All right, maybe some quick questions. How about two truths and a lie?
Oh, I'm so bad at this one because I can't lie. It's like the lie is always the third because I have to think hard about it.
Yeah. How about I go first?
Okay.
I'm a black belt in karate. I won second place in a 9-ball pool tournament. And
I don't know what that is. 9-ball pool?
Yeah, it's when the billiard table with the sticks. And
oh, just regular pool, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts.
I think the last one. Is it? Is
No,
it
I can't play pool.
You can't play pool? Oh, okay. Oh, my goodness.
But I like to think I'm a good liar. We'll see what the audience thinks.
I don't know. This put me on the spot with the lie. I have to think about a creative one. What can I lie to the audience about? Let's see. It's so hard. It goes against my instincts, my core.
Don't worry. They'll forgive you for lying.
Okay, two truths and a lie. I played varsity basketball. I eat very clean, very watchful of what I eat, like reading all the labels and the ingredients when I consume food. And see, I already gave it away. I'm thinking about the lie already. I can't think of a lie. I don't know. I'm a CSWE, SolidWorks.
There you go.
I'm CSWP.
You're close
that's
to it.
Lie. Yeah. So that's 3. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I didn't know those things about you. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I love basketball.
Yeah, when you threw that cup into the garbage can before the podcast started, I said, that's a man that can throw a ball into a hoop.
Hand-eye coordination. And, I mean, it'll still happen, like, sometimes in the house when I'm maybe taking some things out of the what do you call it, in the kitchen appliance, when you open the shelf, the door, what is it called? Cabinets.
Cabinets, there you
Okay,
go.
when you open a cabinet and maybe like a spice will fall down and I'll be like, I'll just catch it like Spider-Man. I'm like, yep, still got it. This hand-eye thing hasn't gone away.
That's awesome. You know, I feel the same way about karate. Like when I catch something, I'm like, oh, that must have been all the training I put in.
What if we're all just like that? Regardless of our training or basketball experience, everyone like innately, by a human being, you basically have those instincts.
Yep, confirmation bias can feel really good. It must be because I'm just so great.
Let's see what advice I can ask the audience for. What have you guys done, all the engineers listening? Are there any engineers that have gone to school while you work full time? Tell us your experience. What was that like? I mean, if you're still hanging around the podcast by now, we really want to know who our real fans are. So if you want
to... We've sifted out the good audience by now.
we filtered out. Let's see. Yeah, I'm interesting. I am genuinely interested in knowing. So I'm gonna go back into this comment section and read what you guys have about to say. This is a thought that I want to ask you. So you're a mechanical engineer degree, right? So let's see. Did it ever feel, because I have this feeling when I'm doing differential equations. Number one, of course, we've been through this. When am I going to use this? That one goes through your head. But the other thought is, I have limited time in Earth. I'm 31. And I'm like, I'm spending every day 3 hours working on this, where I could be working on my CAD, or I could be working on something that would help my ultimate goal, which is to invent consumer products, medical devices to be specific. And what do you do when you have that feeling that you feel like you're wasting your time doing this?
Yes, I have been there. I'll respond to that.
Okay.
I've had that a lot, especially there's this class I took, Vector Mechanics, I think it was called. I had no idea start to finish what that was. But when I got there, I ended up reminding myself that like 100 years ago, I'd probably just be running a plow or something and working 60-hour weeks, just doing something agrarian. And I'm like, well, I guess I can be really grateful that now I still have some degree of spare time and I can spend my time, learning and growing my mind, even if it's against my will sometimes. And I guess it's easier to feel grateful for that. And so I don't know, I think gratitude is an antidote for a lot of things that we go through. And that's kind of helped me to try to feel grateful. But at the same time, I've pulled my hair out. So
where did you learn that gratitude? Who shared that with you? Where did you learn it from?
I got to say my parents are a really good example of that, because usually, if something I don't like happens, I start freaking out, and my parents are such a calming influence, and they always have kind of the bigger picture that they've shared with me.
Well, pass it down to us, maybe to our audience. Like, how does one gain that? I know it'll take years and lots of turbulence, but if you just want to do one step or two steps in the right direction, what would you advise?
That's a great question. I think I'd often think about my dad, because he's got a lot of experience in life, and he's helped a lot of people. And he always takes the bigger picture on things. So he was a director of contracts at Honeywell Aerospace for years and years and years, and he has been through a lot of high-profile negotiations. And when he was negotiating deals, some people would become visibly upset in some of these negotiations if they felt like it wasn't going right for them or whatnot. And he would stop and say, guys, let's take a break here and just think, this isn't my money, this isn't your money, this is the company's money that we're talking about. And we can come to a middle line. And he would talk to him in that way. And when people saw the bigger picture, they would just kind of calm down. So he's done that with me a lot, and it's really helped.
What if somebody in the meeting were like, well, that's easy for you to say, like still combating and
I don't know if he's had that happen too much, but
you're Honeywell.
Yeah.
Look at us, small.
Yeah. I think the biggest deal he's ever negotiated, they were some of the toughest people that just wouldn't back down, and he just did his best and knew at what point he had to stop negotiating, and he worked through it. But testing 1 2.
So the thing about negotiating, it's actually a subject that I'm really passionate about. How many of you listening have heard about Masterclass? You ever heard about it? The Westside Masterclass? There's this guy, this instructor, FBI negotiator named Chris Voss, Voss. And he teaches this class about master negotiating, and I just find it fascinating. Like, I gave the audience one tip, and I'm going to ask Joseph about one tip for his father after this. And I do this on purpose so he has time to think about it now as I'm going to share this story. So the tip that Chris Voss gives is that when you're negotiating, if you give a specific figure that don't end it in 0 or 5, it makes the figure less movable in negotiating. So if I say, well, I want to sell this mouse for $17.23, and I'm negotiating, just like psychologically, based on what he shared with us in the class, it just seems a lot less movable than saying $15 or $20. Seems like there's more wiggle room when you say those round numbers. You don't want wiggle room. You want to get what you want, right? So that's one tip. What did your dad tell you about negotiating? One tip.
I think that my favorite tip from him that I was just so inspired over is he would get auditors, FAA auditors, that would try to audit the contracts process. And when the auditors would come in, he would welcome them in, he'd put them in a conference room, and they'd go over the scope of the audit and everything. And then the next day, he would come to him and say, well, I found 3 to 5 things that we think aren't in conformance. Here it is for your review. And they would be very surprised because usually these auditors were used to people being like, well, we're in conformance, and they didn't want to share anything that was wrong. So he gave them exactly what he felt wasn't in conformance in advance. And that not only kind of disarmed any sense of conflict in the exchange, but it also gave him the control to kind of direct the audit the way that he wanted it to go. And then he would often even ask advice, which was something that they didn't usually get as auditors. And it really made it for an easy audit. And when they'd ask him how it went, he'd say, oh, yeah, we've got 5 or 10 things that we were bringing into conformance now. And they'd ask, well, is that good? And he's like, well, Boeing was just fined like $500 million, or I don't know how much, but it was like a ridiculous amount of money. And so he navigated audits really well.
I'm a big fan of terminology. I like that word I use, conformance.
Mm-hmm.
Conform alignment, right?
Yeah.
So synonym, okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think the right word is compliance now that I say it, but.
Okay. I see. What is like some engineering, now that we're talking about terms, like totally jumping subjects now, but it's just the natural flow of a conversation. What are like some words in your daily life working at Gore? Joseph designs handles for medical devices. What are some terms that you were not the most familiar with, but then when you started working there, like they became part of your vocabulary?
Yes, there's a lot of alphabet soup. Gore is really big on their acronyms. So I've used more acronyms now than I think I ever have.
Okay.
What other terms could there be? Gore is big on design language, right? So I think I've never really appreciated how much thought and detail goes into products than with Gore's. They care so much about the term design language and everything that would go into it.
What is design language?
Yeah, design language would be anything when you can pick it up and know how it works by looking at it. You don't have to fiddle with it. The sort of intuition that, oh, yeah, I can see how it all goes together and how it would work. Design language is that intuition that you can get from just looking at something.
Do you have a team of industrial designers that also work there?
I have worked with industrial engineers there, and they do a lot of good work.
What's maybe one golden nugget that they have shared with you? Because obviously you guys working in tandem, and maybe they give you, when you design a handle, you design something, they tell you design it a certain way because it's more intuitive. What have they shared with you?
For industrial engineering, I think the biggest insight that I got is when you have something that, I don't know, twists or you have to pull a lever or something, they always tend to go towards things that already exist. And they say, well, I modeled that after some yard trimmers because those feel so natural. And I like that they emulate things that already exist that work well.
Yeah, I like that too. I can't think of the example specifically now. Of course, while we're on the podcast, we can't think of it exactly. But I've come across products in my lifetime that the designers want to reinvent how it's used, and it actually maybe it's a little bit better, maybe like 5 or 10% better, but then it just takes you forever to understand how to use it, and it makes you it makes me angry. At least I'm just trying to get the thing done, and I have to YouTube how to use. Okay, changing the blade in a box cutter. It was like some kind of box cutter, and the brand is like Duffy or something like that. It's like a Wolf brand. I don't know what the name is. You can buy them at Home Depot. But I looked up how do you change the blade in this box cutter, and 35,000 people have watched this 2-minute clip from some random person saying, "Oh, this is how you change the blade." And I'm thinking, well, if 35,000 people had to YouTube how to change a blade, you clearly have not designed this very well. I'm thinking in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, people are so successful going simple instead of going more complicated. And like there's this YouTube video that has hundreds of thousands of views that's just a new way to tie your shoes that's easier. I think there really is a lot of market out there for things that are more simple instead of more complex, because it seems like the nature of engineering is you can create more problems than you solve a lot of times.
That reminds me of an example on the podcast. Joseph asked me earlier, like some take-home points or some episodes. Unfortunately, I am awful with names, but I do remember the information. It's like in life how we go about collecting information, but we don't maybe remember the specific scientific article where we got it from, but we just remember the take-home point. I remember, I think Aaron Munker, the host of the show, of the Being an Engineer podcast, had interviewed this woman engineer. I remember she was a woman because we don't have a lot of women engineers. And she mentioned that there was a problem in the assembly line in a factory, and they didn't want to ship out products that were under a certain amount of weight. It was like some problem that had to do with weight in a box. So if it weighs less than 10 pounds, we don't want to ship it to the customer because something had gone wrong, if that was the case. So we need to catch them before they get shipped out. And the engineers were designing this complex solution that had like weights under the conveyor belt and like just very expensive, very elaborate in engineering time and cost, everything. And the guy that was working at the conveyor belt, just the technician, said, "Well, why don't you just put a fan next to the boxes, and if the box is too light, the fan will just blow it off the conveyor belt." And I was like, mind blown. The simplicity, like $10 fan, right?
I love it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with that, any other questions you may have?
I think that's all I've got.
All right. Well, thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it. Rafael Testai.
Joseph Larsen.
Until next time. All right. We did great.
Man, that was the best podcast.
It's really easy. Exactly. So now you have two inputs, the audio and the iPhone audio. So when you edit this, you can just match the peaks where we clapped, mute the audio from the iPhone, and just use the audio here. It's easy.
Perfect.
Yeah. How am I looking?
Oh, man.
Is it straight?
You are looking, it is straight. And you are looking absolutely dapper, gotta say.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm ready when you are.
Sometimes it takes me like 3 tries, but I think I'm feeling good about this.
All right.